Welcome to Sector Report. I'm David Beatson. This week, why New Zealand needs a new animal welfare strategy, what's causing havoc around the hives, and how the new animal tracing scheme's working down on the farm.
At the end of the day, it's all bottom line. It's our income that we're sacrificing for this.
Well, the new law for the controversial National Animal Identification and Tracing System has finally been passed by Parliament. Within 3 years, almost 10 million cattle will be electronically tagged and registered online. Deer come on stream in June next year. But federated farmers remain sceptical about the benefits claimed for the NAIT scheme and will be keeping it under close scrutiny. Our Rural Affairs correspondent, Drew Chappell, has been putting NAIT under the microscope at a Waikato farm.
A lot of farmers are just going to go along with it. They're not really in favour of it. They haven't actually spoken out against it, but a lot of them will see it as a hassle.
For farmers like Stephen Stark, love it or hate it, NAIT is now a fact of life. And like it or lump it, in a globalised world of trade, New Zealand can no longer afford to hide its head in the sand. Our trading partners need reassurance that if the worst was to happen, we would be prepared for it. It's recognised widely that there could well be holes in our biosecurity safety net. If a large part of our cattle, sheep or deer population was infected or at risk, our economy would be severely hit, as we've already seen recently in the kiwi fruit industry. What is a source of contention though is the government's proposed solution, a tagging and tracing system spread across almost all the country's livestock and farmland. It's called NAIT, and if you're a farmer, unless you've been living under a rock or in a cave, you'll have an opinion on it.
I wasn't in favour of NAIT. I think it's a cost that farming could probably spend elsewhere and get a bigger bang for their buck. I think maybe we should be protecting our borders and stopping an incursion as opposed to trying to fight an incursion once it's here. And we are going to have to pay levies throughout the whole operation, and it's another bureaucracy really that we're going to have to fund out of our business. And at the end of the day, it's all bottom line. It's our income that we're sacrificing for this.
But whether you agree with the scheme or, like Stephen Stark, you are critical of NAIT's claims, there's no escaping it. Set to be made law and come into effect in July this year. Federated Farmers NAIT spokesperson Anders Crowfoot says while it might not please everyone, it's a step in the right direction.
New Zealand has had a very good tracing system historically. This is really just modernising it. We can't sort of carry on doing what we always have been because things do move on, and we do need to upgrade things. So that's one of the things that this is adding to our arsenal.
Just what form the new scheme would take was open to debate, and last year the new body welcomed submissions from interested parties. 37 separate submissions were made, and NAIT CEO Russell Bernard says they represented a diverse set of viewpoints.
There was a range of submissions, so from farmer groups, so Beef and Lamb, Dairy NZ, Federated Farmers, people like that, through to individuals. And so some very good submissions. We have made some amendments and suggested some amendments to the Minister from our proposal, and then he'll look at that and then push it through the Cabinet process so levies can be in place by July.
And with the legislation process, I suppose you wouldn't foresee any problems there?
It's just another milestone. So the bill is likely to be passed through the House in April of this year. It has general support from across the parliamentarians, and the cost recovery and the registration processes is just another element of the steps that we are progressing to make NAIT a reality.
If, as expected, all goes according to plan here at Parliament, NAIT should officially pass into law, and as of July 1st, all New Zealand cattle will have to be tagged and all cattle movements recorded under the scheme. If the concept was a bone of contention among farming folk, then the funding model would have been a whole skeleton. Opinions on how the scheme would be funded, as well as how much each farmer would pay and when they would pay it, were varied. And Federated Farmers says what is being proposed now represents a close to fair compromise.
They've basically sort of based an industry recover a ratio across the industries based on what has been put in the past. And the whole thing will actually be up for review on a pretty regular basis. Because it's new, they don't really know where the costs are going to lie, but the aim is having something that is equitable. And certainly from some of the initial talks several years ago about how high the costs are, they seem to have kept them down to a fairly reasonable level. Certainly one that shouldn't drive anybody broke.
But for some farmers, that's not exactly reassuring. In a job where both money and time are at a premium, a scheme which proposes to take away some of both is causing more than a little scepticism.
They're talking about levying a tag at $1.15 to $1.30, I can't quite remember. The tag itself costs $4. Then at slaughter, we're going to have to pay another $1.30, I think, the first year, but that increases up to about $2.15 on the third year. So these are all costs that are going to be going up. We also have to have on-farm costs such as EID readers. Not all farmers have to buy those, but I think we'll have to with the number that we do. You know, electronics are never a one-off cost. They need repair. We've had scales for a number of years, and every 3 or 4 years they go in and they come back with quite large repair bills as well. So, you know, the on-farm cost is quite large. The cost the meatworks will be going through to install all this, that's actually not a cost to the meatworks. That's a cost to the farmer because it'll be deducted out of their schedule. So it's all farmer cost.
While there is currently a 35% government subsidy for the scheme, the numbers are still harrowing for some. There's an initial fee for tags, which differs according to type, and then another fee at slaughter time, which staggers the cost and allows NAIT to smooth out the cash flow. Australia already has a scheme in place, which operates in a similar way to NAIT, and Anders Crowfoot says that's a bonus for us in avoiding some of their mistakes.
Australia would be the closest one. They've got their National Livestock Identification Scheme, and there have been a number of lessons that are being learned from there, so hopefully we won't go through the teething pains that they did, because it did take them a while, and we will have learned from hopefully mistakes that they've made and we won't repeat them.
But Stephen Stark says if the scheme is to benefit farmers, then it should be voluntary.
You know, I'd be quite keen if it was a voluntary system for a few years to iron out the bugs and make sure it does work well, as good as they say. But you know, we're going to be paying a lot of money, and I have my doubts as to whether it's really warranted.
That's no longer an option, however, with the NAIT boundaries now pretty much finalised and the conditions decided upon. It's a reality for stock owners that the face of farming has been changed forever. But whether we're now safer as a country for it is a debate that is far from finished.
Drew Chappell reporting. Coming up, why MAF and the SPCA are joining forces for a new nationwide animal welfare strategy. Welcome back to Sector Report. Well, 2 years ago, the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals said New Zealand's animal welfare law was one of the strongest in the world. But now the SPCA is working with MAF to develop a new animal welfare strategy to strengthen the status of animal welfare codes under the Act and change enforcement processes and responsibilities. How come? Well, to find out, we're talking to the Executive Director of the SPCA, Robin Kippenberg. Welcome, Robin. Let's start by finding out what are the issues that can convince you that we need to actually have a new animal welfare strategy?
Well, I guess the Act's 12 years old. We got a little amendment a couple of years ago fiddling with the sentences, which was really good because we got basically double the sentencing, which meant that animal welfare crime was taken more seriously by the courts and by the public. But now there are a lot of things that are difficult for us in actually enforcing the Act, and it needs to reflect the things that when you're working with an Act, it's a very different thing from when it's on paper, and it behaves really nicely on paper, out in the field not so good.
Yeah, I was wondering, because 2 years ago you were quoted as saying that our animal welfare law is now one of the strongest internationally, strongest in the world.
And that's absolutely so.
So what went wrong? What has gone wrong now you've been out applying it in the field?
I guess that it's not the strength of the Animal Welfare Act at all.
In terms of whatever sanctions there are against,
of course.
So
we have problems with the codes. Now, the codes are the regulations that come out of the Act, and the codes, while in and of themselves are great, they have minimum standards and best recommended practice, they are basically unenforceable.
In what sense?
Well, unless you've got a breach of the actual Act, you have to prove that whatever it is that you're asking people to do, whether it be a cage size for a chook or a pig, or pasture size or whatever, you have to prove that an animal has suffered because of that. And that was never the intention. The intention was to get best practice and to get minimum standards into, and if we can't enforce them, what's the point of having them?
In a way, you should know, because you were there when the original Animal Welfare Act was passed.
That's true.
You were in Parliament.
Absolutely true.
Okay.
And the codes
so it's your fault.
Oh, absolutely. Because a lot of the stuff that came onto the table was just too hard. And the Act would have been like a book if we had actually put everything into it, every specific into it that we needed to. And so, in the way of Parliament, it's much better to push that off into regulation and have an Act which is hopefully a one-size-fits-all. Now, that's fine if the regulations are enforceable. And you can see in fisheries, they've got a very heavy hand with enforcement, and we, on the other hand, with agriculture and even with companion animals, have a light hand.
Being the home cat, the dog.
Cats and dogs and guinea pigs. So the regulations basically, at the moment, there isn't an infringement regime. So if you've got a pen that's the wrong size for your pigs, you don't get a fine, basically, unless that pig is being injured by the size of the cage, then we don't prosecute. We can't prosecute.
So in essence, you've actually got to have proven, demonstrated cruelty and essentially damage to an animal before you can invoke the Act and prosecute anybody.
Invoke the code,
Invoke the code. Really, your only way of enforcing standards at the moment is, in fact, to prosecute people. Are there other options other than prosecution?
We give enforcement notices, and that means sort this out, we'll come back. If you haven't sorted it out, then we'll consider prosecution. But basically, you've got time, and these are the things that you need to do. So,
how many people turn around to you and say, "Oh, get off"? You prove you prove how I've been cruel to that animal. You prove how I've actually breached the Act. Do people do that?
Not in so many words.
They just say get off.
They just say get off. Yeah. And those are the ones that we end up prosecuting. So that's fine, because generally it has to be pretty clear-cut. Dead sheep, an animal that's starved, those things are really easy to prosecute, because they're definitive, and we can get up in front of a judge or suggest to lawyers that this is clearly a case where the defendant should plead guilty, because actually that's the reasonable and right thing to do. And most of our cases don't go the distance of a court, of a court hearing.
Okay.
They don't go to jury trial. Most people will plead guilty and get their punishment, because it's going to be a lesser one. So in that degree, the Act is of course working. And I guess that the thing that we're looking for is a way to pull the industry, especially industry, into the line that the codes would suggest.
But one of the other things you're saying is that you want the Act changed so that MAF and the RSPCA no longer have to bear the cost and responsibility of looking after animals involved in the cases. And if you don't, who should?
The problem that we've got at the moment is that we're involved with cases with a lot of animals. Now, if it's just 1 or 2 animals, that's fine. Generally, that can be dealt with. But at the moment, we have a situation where we have animal hoarders, and so you may go to a property and there can be from 30 up to 100 animals. If the person doesn't admit that that's an untenable situation and sign the animals over to us, we then, when we prosecute, are obliged to keep those animals until the case comes to court. Now, in a recent case that we had, it's been 4.5 years. If we had had animals from that, they would have had to be boarded with the SPCA. It's not a good situation for that animal.
You're working with MAF in a partnership to develop the new strategy. What kind of consultation with people, or opportunity of consultation, will there be? Will there be one?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, because not only will there be consultation with industry and the general public before this is put to Parliament, but also once it goes to Parliament and it goes to Select Committee, then everybody gets another chance to have a say about it. So it's not something that's forced through in the dead of night or on someone's agenda. It actually has a full consultation process. But the time frame is quite short. So the Minister wants this through by early next year. So we're,
You're at it.
We're on a time frame, and I think that's a good thing, because it gets people really thinking about this and working out what they would have in an ideal world.
Robin Kippenberger, thank you very much.
That's a pleasure.
Robin Kippenberger, Executive Director of the SPCA. And next on Sector Report, what's worrying the country's beekeepers? Beekeepers have a lot to worry about, and maybe we should be worrying too. New Zealand honey is building a strong reputation in the global market with exports of about $71 million a year. But it's the bees' role as the great pollinator for our horticulture sector that's even more valuable, estimated to be worth in excess of $5 billion a year. And last year, Canterbury and Poverty Bay reported that up to 30% of the local bee population had simply disappeared. Whether it's the invasion of the varroa mite, the use of some pesticides and seed treatment chemicals, or the destruction of pollen-producing plants like gorse, there's a growing range of risks facing the bee colonies of the country. And joining us now is Maureen Maxwell, the Regional President for the Oceania Commission of Apimondia, the Rome-based International Federation of Beekeeping Associations. Maureen, thanks for joining us. Look, let's start with the tough one. Colony collapse. Is there any sign of those bee colony collapses that are happening overseas reaching New Zealand?
Bee colony losses as such are something that happens continuously within our industry, but the numbers and the proportions that are happening overseas, we're getting small pockets that are experiencing losses, and we're constantly trying to evaluate why that is happening.
Have you got a steer on that?
Well, there are certainly some areas in intensive horticulture that our beekeepers are experiencing big losses. You know, when I'm saying big losses, 30–40% per annum, I mean, if your average dairy farmer lost 30 or 40% of his cows or his herd every year, they'd be hell to pay. But they think, right, they're just a few bees, and of course we're fortunate in that we split and we regroup, but of course it compromises our ability to work and get our return from the industry, whether it be a honey crop or full strength for pollination. Those areas that are high intensive and that agrochemicals, sprays, pesticides are being used are definitely affecting the beekeeping industry.
Overseas, the colony collapses have been associated with the use of neonicotinoid pesticides. Is that also a practice used in New Zealand?
It is indeed, increasingly so. And the build-up in the soils, the surrounding environment, it's not just the crops and the seeds and the pastures themselves that are affecting the bees, but There's a lot of new research which is coming out, and we are very concerned about this, so we want re-evaluation of those neonicotinoids that have been allowed into our environment here.
Let's move on to a couple of the other problem areas. One, the big one probably, is the Varroa mite. What kind of damage is the Varroa mite still causing as far as the honey harvesting is concerned?
Yes, Varroa has been with us now for 12 years. It's now throughout New Zealand. It has created a lot of problems in that we're needing to visit our hives more frequently, so it's much more intensive. It's costing us to treat, because the bees can no longer survive in New Zealand without our help now. So that the natural pollination...
Bees can no longer survive without human support in this country.
So for a short time, the bees may swarm and survive, but long term, their sustainability, they cannot survive without our help now. We're having to expose our bees to synthetic controls. There is resistance building up to that now. So yes, it is greatly impinging.
How much harvest has been lost due to this?
I'm not sure I can put a figure on that. The harvest generally is quite down this year. There's a couple of small areas in the South Island that have experienced a good season, but certainly the North Island, because of the weather conditions this year, have had a severe hit to their harvest. And again, the work with the Varroa, the extra work has greatly impinged on our returns. So long term, there are going to be many beekeepers saying, hey, I'm out of here. This isn't working.
One of the solutions has been a genetic solution which would destroy the Varroa mite. Are you in favour of that?
Of course we're in favour of it, but the reality is that insects evolve so very, very quickly that although we have been doing a lot of research and trying to breed bees that are resistant to the mites, and people all over the world are working on this, the progress is slow.
Okay. The other issue, of course, is that in kiwi fruit country there's spraying to stop the PSA. My understanding is that spray may also be affecting the bees.
It's affecting the bees, but there's also other concerns there that applications that have been made in the kiwi fruit and the antibiotics there might turn up in the honey crop further down the track. And we do not want that impinging on our clean green image for our exports. It could severely damage our export reputation.
Okay, give me the markets where clean and green are essential to your penetration.
Our main market is Europe. Globally, New Zealand's honey market, we're only very, very small. We're only about 1%, but we're right up there at the top end in the premium market, which is where we want to stay. So we have to have a point of difference on that globally. And certainly the fact that we're antibiotic-free because of our pest management strategy, and our GMO-free stance.
GMO-free?
That we can put on our honey going into Europe is giving us a premium. Now, Europe is our main, Asia is certainly emerging as
for those who don't know, GMO is what?
Genetically modified organisms.
Okay.
Now there is a big push from Europe that they are not wanting any evidence of this in their food products. We can guarantee that at the moment, and we're hoping to hang on to that. So we get a premium for our product in those areas.
Final problem. I understand honey laundering is a worry. People passing off other people's honey for kiwi honey.
Yes, worldwide, because big dollars, especially with the high-end medicinal honey, that is a problem. That bulk honey is being sold into some markets. It has been cut, mislabelled, misrepresented so on that global marketplace. So verification, authenticity of product is very important to us. We think country of origin labelling should be mandatory. We're certainly using that a lot because it is working to our advantage. Personally, I would not like to see bulk honey being sold offshore.
So
I would like to see it all labelled here.
Come on, who are the big cheats?
It's hard to put the finger on that, but anyone that wants to make a quick dollar. And we don't want to see our honey being misrepresented offshore. And we don't want to see, if honey imports should be coming into New Zealand, that product from other markets, perhaps via China, going into Australia, is being cut and then sold to us as Australian honey, when in actual fact it has come into Australia from another source.
Maureen Maxwell, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Maureen Maxwell, Regional President for the Oceania Commission of Appomondia, the International Federation of Beekeeping Associations. And that's all for this week. Remember, you can catch this show again anytime online at country99tv.co.nz. Thanks for your company. I'm David Beatson for Sector Report. See you next week.